acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that the county of Haliburton is located on Treaty 20 Mississauga territory and the traditional territory of the Mississauga and Chippewa nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaties First Nations, which are Curve Lake, Rama, Hiawatha, Alderville, Scugog, Beausoleil, and Georgina Island First Nations. We acknowledge the shared presence of Indigenous nations throughout the area and recognize its original Indigenous inhabitants as the stewards of its lands and waters since time immemorial. Thank you very much. Adoption of the agenda. Could I have a motion to adopt the agenda? A seconder? I've got a motion. Sorry, the motion says, be it resolved the Haliburton County Library Board adopt the agenda for April 9th, 2025 regular meeting. Mover, please. Paul and Adele. Okay. All in favor? Motion is carried. Any conflicts of interest on anybody's part? Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda. The consent agenda consists of the adoption of the minutes from the last meeting, the librarian's report, circulation statistics. Does anybody want to have any questions about any of those items or want them brought forward for discussion? Okay, seeing none, I have a motion that the Haliburton County Library Board accepts the consent agenda for the April 9th, 2025 regular meeting as presented. Moved by Lisa, seconded by Jen. Okay. Next item is the financial report. You want to go through those?
Sure. Just briefly, so at the previous meetings, we didn't have the year-to-date actuals in the software yet, and those are starting to show up. Finance department has been working hard over there. So everything seems to be pretty on track so far this year. A couple of notes just to highlight. We were informed by Overdrive, which is the vendor that we get our ebooks and e-audiobooks from, that they are going to impose a 2% increase on
Tariff? 2% tariff?
No, not a tariff, a surcharge on credit card payments. Yeah. So we pay in US dollars and we use their corporate credit card to pay that. And unfortunately, that's the method that we have to pay in US dollars. So this isn't just impacting us, a lot of other libraries are impacted the same way. Yeah. So the Ontario Library Service has reached out to Overdrive to see if there's some way that they can make a different scheme. So essentially it would cost 2% more for the ebooks and e-audiobooks for us. Hopefully they don't go through with it, but it looks like it may be that way. So that will decrease our buying power. Yeah. And then just, you did mention tariffs, that's still up in the air. We still haven't heard anything definitive about books being, subject to tariffs with the United States. So we'll just stay tuned, and if that's imposed, we'll have to make for kind of what we're gonna adjust. That's everything. If you
any questions on the financial statement? Being none, I have a motion that reads, "Be resolved that the Haliburton County Library Board accepts the financial report as presented." Have a mover, please. Paul, seconded by Adele. I like the way this is working out, 2 inside, 2 outside. Okay. Oscar, we told you had started 4:05 and it's now 4:05. How's that for a plan?
That's better than the meeting I had yesterday, Mr. Chair, where I thought I started at 6 and it started at 7. So yeah, this is perfect.
Must have been a municipality, right?
It actually was. It was
How would I know that?
Yeah, it was the town of northeastern Manitoulin and the Islands, formerly known as Little Current.
Yes,
So, yeah,
been there many times.
God's country, just like Haliburton. So
Just like Sudbury. I used to drive over to Manitoulin Island when I lived in Sudbury all the time.
it's going to be -20 tomorrow, and I will be using biblical terms to describe the community. It won't be God's country. Let's put it there.
No, not for a while.
No.
Oscar, are you going to use the deck that you sent us?
I am. So if you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen.
So this document came in our package. You'd have seen that, okay?
Yep. So first off, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for allowing us to be here. It's always good to present to the library. I will say I do very much enjoy these presentations. So we've completed our audit of the library board for the year ended December 31st, 2024. And it's my pleasure to be here today to provide you with an overview of the audit findings and the financial statements. So we've conducted our audit in accordance with Canadian auditing standards, and these are the rules that govern how accountants do these types of audits. You'll notice that our opinion says that the financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects, and materiality is the level of errors that we're able to absorb before we're either required to change our opinion and have them corrected. So consistent with not-for-profit organizations that don't have a profit motivation, it's generally calculated as a percentage of revenues or expenses. If you're for-profit, it's basically calculated as a percentage of your net income. So we've used 3% of revenues, and that has yielded a materiality of just under $42,000. Now, as auditors, we use materiality for a number of different purposes. For example, we use it to calculate our sample sizes, but what I would suggest for the board is the most relevant use of materiality is it determines what's known as our posting threshold. And this is the level above which, if we have an error that's uncorrected, we have to report it to you today. So that is about 5,000, or sorry, that's 5% of materiality, or an amount of $2,000. So the audit is done. We are prepared to issue what's known as an unqualified audit opinion, and this is the highest level of assurance that you can receive under Canadian auditing standards. And there's basically two things that we need to do. One is we need to see the board approve the financial statements. The financial statements are technically live until such time as they're approved by the board. And then we do need to obtain a management representation letter, which is an attestation from staff that they've provided us with all information. There hasn't been anything that they haven't disclosed. There are no issues that we believe require disclosure to the board. There's no uncorrected audit differences that are above that $2,000 posting threshold. So when I describe this as a clean audit, this is about as clean as it gets. We haven't identified any weaknesses in internal controls. There's no issues that we have from a scope limitation where we were denied access to any information that we requested, and no differences with management. I will say we get great support from the county as part of our audit process. I will also let you know that you are the second library of my municipal clients where we're actually presenting financial statements to. And as an accountant, I am a bit of a type A personality, and I can appreciate, my suggestion is there's probably more type Bs on this board, given the nature of what you do. But at the end of the day, I oftentimes think that the order in which things are presented is a reflection of the support that we receive from our clients. And as I've mentioned, you're the second library to go in the 2024 fiscal year. So I think that says something. In terms of the financial statements themselves, the first financial statement is the statement of financial position. And this is a snapshot of your assets and liabilities at year end. And so what you'll notice is you have about $480 in your bank account. And as we've mentioned in the past, this is generally consistent with what we see in other library boards where you use the county to provide your treasury function. So typically any excess cash, any accumulated surpluses that you have would actually be maintained by the county, and they owe you that money. And so what you'll notice is you do have a relatively small cash balance. you do see that the balance receivable from the county of Haliburton has actually increased by about $80,000 on a year-over-year basis, and that's a reflection of your operations. In terms of other items, you can see your accounts payable and accrued liabilities, which are expenses that are incurred prior to year end and paid after year end, fairly consistent on a year-over-year basis. Part of this is payroll, and part of this is also capital expenditures and other operating costs that you have. From an investments perspective, your tangible capital assets represents the investment that you have in your long-lived, I'll call it infrastructure, for lack of a better term. As you buy assets, they go on the books and you write them off over the useful lives. So what you'll see is the total value of your capital assets has gone up by about $15,000. There was $133,000 of capital expenditures during the year, the bulk of which related to your collection of about $89,000, various materials, including books and electronic materials. There was also a purchase of some office equipment or office furniture of about $29,000. So these capital additions bring your number up. And then what we do is we take about $118,000 of amortization expense. That's us expensing the assets over their useful lives, which brings the number down. You'll see that from an overall perspective, the library has an accumulated surplus of about $831,000. $421,000 of that is the investment that you have in your tangible capital assets. The other $410,000 of that is basically your accumulated surplus since inception, and that's reflected in the due to from less the payables. From a operating perspective, the next statement is your statement of operations, and this shows your revenues and your expenses for the year. So what you'll find is total revenues have actually gone down. They've dropped by about $40,000, of about 2.8%. Part of that is the contribution from the county has actually gone down by about $24,000. It reflects your needs, both operating and capital. So as your capital program changes, your budgets may change as well. In addition, last year, there were slightly higher donation revenues. Donations are always a good thing. The problem with donations is oftentimes they're problematic in terms of realization. And so in some years, you'll get big donations, some years you won't, but a fairly healthy revenue still at $1.35 million. What you'll notice is at the same time, your total expenses have gone down as well by about $97,000. So while revenue is down, expenses are down as well. Part of that is your wages and benefits have actually dropped by about $69,000. And we've done an analysis of the employees at the library, and there have been some staff departures during 2024, which bring your total number down. Similarly, library supplies are down by about $25,000 as well. And it's just a question of when you incur the costing. So from an overall perspective, the library has about $1.35 million of revenues, $1.25 million of expenses. So there is an annual surplus of $98,000. And I'll caution, ladies and gentlemen, and I know it may sound weird for what I'm about to say, but if I was a board member, I'm not sure I would pay that much attention to your surplus. And the reason why is because how you report from a financial perspective is different from how you actually budget. And so in order to be able to show the impact, what we've done on this slide, and you would have seen this in the past, is we've taken your surplus per your financial statements and adjusted it for how you actually budget. So what we do is we add back the amortization expense of $118,000 because you don't budget for amortization. What you actually budget for is capital. And so you've budgeted for $133,000 of capital versus $118,000 of amortization expense. Once you make this adjustment, what you'll find is that it actually starts to drop because of this differential. And so once again, it's important to recognize how your library reports versus how you budget. What you can see over the last 9 years, if you will, revenues have gone up, they've increased, they've dropped a little bit, as we've mentioned in 2024. But by and large, this red line, which is your reported surplus, has generally stayed on the positive side of break even, which is always good because people will sometimes begin to wonder about whether you have what we call structural deficits where you're consistently losing money. Once we make the adjustment for your surplus, what you can see is consistent with what you would have had in the past. In some years, you would have broken even, slight losses, but at the end of the day, from an overall perspective, you can see that the library's actually done well financially from a sustainability standpoint. This isn't the case where expenses are significantly exceeding the amount of revenues that you have. So that's a bit of an overview of your financial statements as well as your historical perspective. One of the things that I always like to do, particularly for libraries, is give you some non-financial stuff, just to talk a little bit about your operations from our perspective anyways, in a way that we see you. And so in the prior year, you would have remembered we would have done some benchmarking against other libraries. What I wanted to do this year, and I admittedly, this is my preference, but I just thought it would be interesting, is to talk about what you guys used to look like 10 years ago versus what you look like today. And not so much in comparison to your peers, but in comparison to yourself, because I think it actually tells an interesting picture. And once again, I'm not the librarian on the call, but I was curious to see how this went. And so what you'll see is we don't have statistics for 2024. We only have statistics for 2023 because the ministry collects them and we're 1 year behind. But it's interesting to see how your library has actually evolved and adapted to technology and social changes. And I would suggest to you personally, a lot of this demonstrates why you're as successful as you have been. If you think about 10 years ago, the use of technology, the use of electronic platforms really was there, but it's becoming more and more prevalent in the last 10 years. And what you will see is that the number of website visits have tripled. What you'll find is that your in-person visits have dropped significantly. And what this tells us is people are starting to access you through different channels as well. Despite all of the technological change, what you'll find is that the number of active cardholders has actually gone up. It hasn't gone down. So there's more interest in the library than there ever has been in the past. And people sometimes would talk about whether the internet is actually going to be the death of the library systems. It's a discussion I've had. I don't know if the people on this call have had it, but for fun, we've had it. And what we can see is that if I took you and brought you back to 10 years ago and we had this conversation, your library would be very different. You have more active card holders, you have more website visits, less people coming in person. But the other thing that you'll find is you've become a lot more of a community hub. And I mean this as a compliment. The number of programs that you delivered in 2023 was more than double what you were doing in 2014. And not only is it the number of programs that have doubled, but the attendance in the programs has doubled as well. And so when I think about technology and change, the issue is how do you stay relevant? If you're a typewriter manufacturer, that's very difficult to do. If it's a library, I would suggest to you that what you have done is you found those two very key success factors. One is you've made a successful transition over to digital platforms as opposed to books. The second thing is you've increased your presence from a community programming perspective to keep you relevant to the community. And it's interesting. You were talking about the state of emergency that you had, and I don't know the details, but what I do know is this, and I think I may have shared this with you. During the pandemic, what people were finding is in northern and rural communities, there was a resurgence in the interest in libraries because oftentimes if you were isolated, you would go to the library for internet access to become a hotspot. So what you find is you very much become that community center. I don't know if you saw that uptick over the last couple of weeks. I'm assuming people were trying to stay off the roads, but once again, I think it's interesting because we talk about how you've done over the last 10 years and how you've stayed successful from a financial perspective. I would suggest to you that stats like this don't demonstrate what you've done, they demonstrate how you've done it. And similarly, when you look at the compositions that you have now in terms of your collection, you can very much see the shift that goes between those more traditional hard copies versus the electronic format. So what you'll find is that your annual circulation of hard copies has basically dropped almost by half in the last 10 years. The number of volumes that you held have come down, but what you can see is that electronic resources that you have, those e-resource copies and CDs and DVDs, have actually gone up. And in some cases, they've gone up by 25 to 50%. And this is where you're making the shift in order to have these results here. And it really is unfortunate. And I know Andrea knows the stats that we're looking at. We actually went back to 2004 to try to find it as well, because we thought a 20-year perspective would be interesting. The issue is you could tell the use of digital and electronic formats wasn't as prevalent back then because they weren't tracking it. And so we didn't actually have information to compare it to. And if we did, the numbers would be zero or very close to. So, ladies and gentlemen, I can appreciate I may be talking a bit at this point, but I just wanted to put this up because, as I've mentioned, I was curious to see how you've evolved. I was curious to see how you've maintained your financial success and how you've responded to the tradition or the change in technology. And so for two things. One is I think you've done a very good job adapting to the changes. And two, we can tell from your investments and your ongoing operations that you're continuing to do that. I do think that the program attendance is particularly meaningful in communities where you have higher representations of seasonal residents, because oftentimes they feel left out. They feel like they're not getting services for the tax dollars that they provide. And I don't know how you track your program attendance, but I will tell you right now, anybody who doubles their program attendance is doing a really good job of being present in the community. So, Mr. Chair, members of the board, that concludes our presentation. I'd like to thank you once again for allowing us the opportunity to be of service. I really do enjoy working with the library and the county. If there are any questions, more than happy to answer them at this time.
Yes, Oscar, I do have one question on the activity indicators.
Yep.
On page 8, you show a number for in-person visits of 660.
Yep.
I don't understand that number.
I will tell you, this is something that we grabbed. This is something that we grabbed off a ministry website that tracks it. I did check the numbers because I know it was a significant change. I will check again. I'm not sure how the ministry has accumulated that, but I'll double check. I haven't spoken to Andrea about why the change. I will tell you, I wonder if the data is wrong.
I think the data is wrong because we certainly have more than 660 visits to our library.
Well, because we have 10,000 people coming in to attend the program.
That's right.
So
Go ahead,
we did, so thank you to Tessa and Hillary. We dove into the numbers.
Yeah.
When we saw Oscar's presentation, we looked kind of back at those statistics. So we did have a big drop in-person visits in the pandemic in 2020. But we did we tried to brainstorm what might be the reason. And 660 is definitely not the number of visitors for an entire year. You know, we have 150 people came in one day, you know, over March break. It is in the annual statistics are submitted to the ministry every year by all the libraries. And we have what's called a typical week. And so it's a week that's in the fall where we count everything. And so it really can depend on that week how the library looks for the year, because if you imagine you amplify that, if it happens to be a slow week when we're counting, you know, and you times that by 52, it really can make the numbers vary.
I think the easiest way to correct this is put a 0 at the end of 660. Then we might be getting it right.
The timing has changed of when we do typical weeks, so we typically have a range of dates to choose from. And for us, we're a seasonal community, as Oscar was saying, so we are a lot busier during the summer months and a lot quieter when people go away, for example, or our tourists aren't here using us as much. Our seasonal residents may not be here as much, and so it is quieter for us in certain parts of the year than others. And so depending on when that typical week is selected for us to do all the counting, it really does influence not all of the numbers. So some of the numbers come through counting database numbers and that type of thing. But when we look at in-person visits, if it's a slow week during typical week, that's sort of
I want you to know that I went to the library in Boquete in Panama.
mhm.
And the only problem I had when going there is that nobody spoke English. Anyway,
So
Yeah.
what you're saying is the 660 is for one
Yeah.
particular week?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Paul, all yours.
Oscar, is it possible to put an asterisk on that 660 value with a note somehow indicating that there's some question as to the data input there, in case this, if it's posted for future use, so the appearance of the thing isn't skewed?
If I could make a suggestion, what I would do is I would take it right off the slide. Rather than putting it in and trying to explain it, I would take, because I
Yeah,
think,
that's a good idea.
yeah, I think the data's flawed. And like I said, we just picked up the ministry. I blame the province of Ontario for this one. So,
Me too. Thank you, Oscar.
Thanks.
It is a complicated process of putting in all the statistics, and some things change over time. So if you look at our website visits, for example, our old website calculated visits when people were using the library catalog, and then our new website doesn't incorporate the statistics. They're separated out to the software, the BiblioCommons and the website visit. So the stats look like they've dropped, but it's not that not that the use has dropped, but the stats have for that.
Okay,
So it all depends on what you're looking at exactly.
okay. Jen, you have a question?
I do actually, and it's for Andrea. Andrea, do you know in 2014, were you using typical week formula for creating those stats, the 2014 stats, or do you know how they were created?
I can't speak from firsthand knowledge, but it's generally a process that all libraries go through. So if you go on the provincial government website for libraries, you can see all of the libraries across Ontario, and you can look at all the statistics. I'm assuming they would have been doing something like that all the way back, but I have been in BC until 3 years ago, so I can't speak to that specifically.
Yeah, I do like the idea of taking out, it's an illuminating statistic. If we could just have some confidence in it, it would be such a great statistic. But even if it were a typical week, who knows? It could have been that in 2014, the typical week was the last week of August. Like, really, it could be so different.
we do,
Even using the same method.
we do know, Jen, to your question, in 2004, they used typical week. In 2014, they annualized the numbers. So
Okay.
that's why we didn't go to 2004, because if you multiply by 52, you get a weird result.
Right.
So I would suggest we could take it out. The other thing, Andrea, is if you have annual attendance in person, I'm happy to stick your number in.
Oh, that's a good
Okay,
idea.
yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
Okay, anybody else have a question? Being none, I have a motion that says, be it resolved that the Haliburton County Library Board accepts the auditor's presentation and draft financial statements as presented. Moved by Adele, seconded by Paul. All in favor? Motion carried. Thank you very much. Now, in the follow-up to that, I have a motion that says, be it resolved that the Haliburton County Library Board directs that the library's 2024 year-end budget surplus be transferred to the library resources once the year-end auditing process has been completed. It should say reserve, right?
Yeah,
Not
it should say
resources, that's what I
reserves.
thought, okay. It says resources on it. Okay. Any questions? Motion? Move it. Adele? Seconded by Lisa. Thank you, Lisa. All in favor? Motion carried. Okay, that takes care of the financial side of things. Next item is the library policies.
We did meet.
Oh, Oscar's still here. Oscar, thank you very much. I thought you just snuck away.
Thanks so much, Oscar.
Thank you, Oscar.
Oscar,
most
how's my hometown doing? You still in Sudbury?
Still in Sudbury. So
Okay. Are
that's
the
good.
roads any better? The roads any
No.
better?
No, it's the potholes seem to be particularly bad this year.
Thank you very much, Oscar.
Thank you. You're welcome. Sorry if I may, Lisa, it's good to see you again.
You as well.
Okay, take care, guys. Bye.
Thanks, Oscar.
Okay, policies. Adele, do you want to help us with that? Because I've been away and I know we've done some work on that, so I'll leave it to you to help us out.
So the policy committee did
And
meet,
Jackie's on the policy committee,
yeah,
Adele and myself.
Jackie and Jan.
Jan.
So we did meet in the last month and we did a deep dive into one of the policies, which was board
Self-evaluation.
self-evaluation. It ended up taking the entire time allotted for the policy committee meeting. Thank you to Jackie Jack did a lot of research as well on other board self-evaluations. And after going through all our policies, basically with a fine-tooth comb, adding, deleting, etc., what we did end up with was a fairly large revision that Andrea is going to work on and present next month.
That policy has always been a difficult one.
Mhm.
And Andrea and I worked on one for a couple of years ago, I guess. Didn't get very far with it because it needed a deep dive and revision. So thank you for doing that.
Well, and actually Jackie took that, the results of what you had discussed with Andrea and incorporated that into her research.
Good. Yeah. Jen, do you have a question? No, okay. You're fixing your hair.
Oh, yeah, scratching my head.
Jackie, any comments?
No, I think that we did a pretty thorough job. I think it took 2 hours and we went through it and considered the suggestions that had been made in 2023, as Adele has said, and feel that we were pretty thorough and have come up with a pretty good evaluation, considering all the subtleties of, evaluating one's own performance on a board. Is that really a realistic thing to do versus the performance of the whole board? Anyway, we talked it all through, and I look forward to seeing the final result.
And that'll be a document the board will deal with. We'll do a self-evaluation at the board. Those are always really interesting. I've done many of them in my life, and some work really well, some don't.
Well, we'll find out.
Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, and actually to that point, I really like what's been done, and I'm so grateful that Jackie really spearheaded that. My biggest takeaway is that it's really clear. The language is understandable, it's relatable, it's also based on good practices from other libraries, including some university libraries. It's been tightened up, made better, and indeed, there are 3 or 4 different probable ways that you can tackle a board evaluation, and none of them are wrong and none of them are right. It's just what works for any one board, and I think clarity is the key to all of it. And we've come up with Jackie's very strong leadership, come up with a very clear document, a very simple document. So I really like it.
Well, thank
Thank-
you. It was definitely a collaborative effort.
Thank you very much, and all the board, but particularly the group that put this together. Really appreciate it. If we can pull this off, we're set forever. We've been struggling with this. I've been on the board for, I don't know how many years now, 4 or 5, 6, I don't know, but we've struggled with it every year, every couple of years. So thank you very much for doing that. Next item is any business arising from the minutes. I see none. Any new business? I see none. Municipal roundtable update. Anything going on in the world of politics we should know about? Other than your budget for maintenance and all that stuff's going to be shot given this storm, but we make allowances for that. We don't need a closed session today that I'm aware of. And so that leaves me with one more motion. Be it resolved that the April 9th, 2025 regular meeting of the Haliburton County Library Board now adjourned. The time is 4:35. Could I have a mover, please, and a seconder? Jackie and Jen. And I just need a motion to approve. Yes, all in favor? Carried. You really don't have to do that, but I'm going to do it anyway. All right, meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, folks.
Thank you. Thank you.
See you next time.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.